Hey everybody, Michigan here, welcome back to the channel, and a different type of video for you. This time, I'm going to be reacting and giving my opinions, as well as taking a look at this overall meta list that everybody in the class, clan, family has come up with. So you can see we have 21 total responses here. Now, this survey was filled out by XOs and tier 10 callers within the class family. So we're going to take a look. And I'm not going to show any names for this in case some people don't like what certain callers put in, but I'm going to kind of give my personal reaction to it. So let's go right ahead. So I asked all of our officers and callers to fill this out so that we can have some sort of common denominator between all the clans. A lot of players will play with other clans within the class family other than their own. So it's important that we at least have some sort of standard for everybody to go off of. If one clan prefers this tank and other clans don't, then when they go to Legionnaire over there, it might be a little more difficult for the caller. So I asked, what is a meta list? And this is what I put on here, and we'll read it off real quick. A meta list is a collection of vehicles that we recommend all players have in order to have a competitive and well-balanced lineup for competitive clan-on-clan play. Ideally, all vehicles in this list should have multiple uses and be the most competitive in their respective classes. Avoid specialty vehicles that are only called for once in a while. However, if you feel strongly about a particular vehicle, you are free to add it to your meta list of tanks. And then I said, if you still have questions, let me know. So this basically means that I really only want people selecting vehicles that are called for very often, or ones that they just really like and they feel that should definitely make it. And I've categorized this by lights, mediums, heavies, TDs, artillery. So let's take a look. So first off, I listed all the lights here, if you want to think about how this is built out. And the requirement for a vehicle to make it on the meta list is 65%. Now, I stated in the survey link, or the post in our forum, that if there weren't enough tanks on the meta list, that I was going to drop it to 50% to allow a couple more vehicles to get on there. So for the lights, we're going to start off easy. So you can see the Panhard EBR 105, probably the most competitive light. All 21 people said this is a meta tank. So this made it onto our list. The Manticore was very close, 9 responses. 2 more, and it probably would have made it. And a couple votes there for the T100. Another strong light as well, sort of in between the Manticore and the EBR. Still a quick tank, great gun, much better than the Manticore. Better DPM than the EBR, but definitely lacking in just overall speed. So the Panhard EBR is our first tank to go on the meta list and our only light tank. So let's take a look at mediums. So we have a huge array of mediums here. So let's take a look at some of these other ones. We had 1 vote for the 121, not the strongest tank. Same with the 121B, arguably a little bit better. We did have 3 votes, which isn't bad. 2 for the 30B. A very poor vehicle, but it does have fantastic DPM. You can actually get it up to close to 4,000. But fortunately, it's just not the greatest vehicle there. We had 1 for the Batchat, very high damage output, but struggles a lot in today's meta. 1 for the Carl, nice 4-round auto reloader. However, it's often overshadowed by the new Lion. 1 vote there. 2 votes for the Sente X, recently buffed, great DPM. However, it falls in a spot similar to the Chieftain, which we'll see later. So it is usually not the best vehicle to bring. Now the CS63, 19 out of 21 votes there. We're 95%, so our first medium to make it onto the list. CS, super fast, can take positions early, good gun, only hits for 390, but the speed, being able to go about 75 kilometers an hour in that rapid mode is fantastic, and it's unparalleled by any other medium. We had 0 votes for the E50M. Leopard 1, this one surprised me. 15 votes for 75%, making it over the cut by about 10%. This is a tank I don't personally call for, but I see a lot of other tanks call for. I prefer the Lion, and as that's the next tank up, we'll discuss that one in a bit. But the Leopard, good DPM, good camo, very accurate, and a great all-round sniper tank. So that is our second medium to make it up. The Lion, 60%, missing out on the meta list by just 1 vote. And I was really tempted at this point to, we're just going to drop it down to 50%. But as I can see, there's plenty of other mediums above that 60 mark. This tank did not actually make it. Now, the Lion is a very strong medium. It suffers a little bit in accuracy compared to the Leopard, but what it does gain is a little bit more turret armor and that 4-round auto reloader similar to the Carl, but with a lot more speed. Now, the Leopard is faster, and the reason I personally prefer the Lion is that when it comes down to those in-game scenarios, having an auto reloader where you can dump 4 shells in quick succession to finish off a heavy or a medium tank is something that a Leopard 1 cannot do. Moving on, we had no votes for the M48A5 Patton. It's a decent tank, good view range, good gun, but the tumor on top and its large size makes it a little difficult to deal with. Now, the M60 actually got a vote. It is much faster than its counterpart in the M48 Patton, but it shares a lot of the same characteristics for it, and while it got 1 vote, it's not even close to making it on that list. Now, the Object 140, probably the gold standard when it comes to medium tanks. 95%, so same as the CS63. This tank, good gun depression, good camo, great turret armor. It's just a great all-around medium tank. And actually, I prefer it over a similar vehicle, which you can see coming up. 1 vote for the 430U. Used to be meta, however, with the 430U nerf, it quickly fell out of the meta list entirely. It's sort of a pseudo-heavy medium vehicle there, hitting for 440 rather than the 390 or 320 that a lot of mediums hit for. But unfortunately, it has, with its nerf and its gun handling and speed, it's just not the best vehicle to bring anymore. Object 907, 75%. Now, this vehicle is similar to 140. It has lower camo, less accuracy, higher DPM, and better armor than the 140, which makes it more suitable for close-range maps where you need mediums. The 140 is much better at long range than the 907, but the 907 has that boat-shaped hull, which means it can actually get some nice bounces off against heavy and opposing medium tanks, especially when you over-angle aside. Next, we're moving on to the Progetto. Again, recently nerfed, which was a little bit surprising to me. It got 1 vote, 4-round auto reloader, but again, overshadowed by the Lion. STB-1, now this was another surprising one. This is a fantastic medium tank, great gun depression, good DPM. Accuracy isn't that great. So it got close, 40%, just 1 vote less than the Manticore earlier. And while this was on our previous meta list, it is not going to make it on this one, though I personally did vote for this vehicle. None for the T-22 medium, a tank that's arguably pretty similar to the 907. The T-62A actually got 3 votes. Now, you have to remember that this is a combination of multiple clans. So we have some clans, and my guess would be that this might be some of our Class Y officers. Now, when you don't have a 140 and you don't have a 907, the next best tank to bring that's similar is going to be that T-62A, especially since it's readily available to purchase once you have a Tier 10 Russian, which a lot of people do have. A lot of people get fairly early, and you can just purchase it as it's in the special vehicles section. So, it's not as good, less gun depression, and slower than the 140, but still a decent vehicle. However, it's not going to make the meta list. Now, the T-95E6, a Clan Wars reward tank. This tank is pretty terrible in all areas except for its gun. Now, similar, and actually I skipped the K91, and that's fairly similar here. The K91 and the T-96 both share great guns and great DPM. The K91 has much better DPM. However, it does have it is rear turreted, so it's going to limit your ability to fight on ridge lines, where the T-95E6 excels. Now, great DPM is not going to be enough to get them on the meta list, as the K91 gets 0 votes and the T-95E6 only gets 15. Now, TVP, pretty much the most damage you can get out in the shortest period of time for any medium. I believe the Foch B actually will get out damage quicker than this, but in terms of mediums, the TVP is unrivaled. 6 votes, 30%. However, its lack of hit points and armor really hold it back. Finally, the UDES 1516, 1 vote. Now, this is a fairly underrated medium tank, and I'm surprised it only got 1 vote. When it gets on a ridgeline, it's extremely difficult to pen, as it's almost like a Sturv with a turret on it. However, only 1 vote. it's just not the best vehicle. There's a lot of other tanks we would rather be taking in here than the UDES 1560. So for our medium tanks, we got the CS63, we got the Leopard 1, Lion just missed it, the Object 140, the 907, and the STB1 just missed it, and the TVP, coming in close, but not close enough. Moving on to the heavy vehicles, we have quite a selection here. 113, no votes. Same with the Beijing Opera. They're pretty much the same vehicle. The 116 F3, the new Clan Wars Ward vehicle, pretty terrible tank. No votes there. Our first vote, we get the 60 TP. Our first 750 Alpha Heavy, and arguably a pseudo super heavy with 5 votes. However, it's just not the best vehicle in its class. Moving up, just missing the cut with the 50B. Great 4-round autoloader. However, it has no turret armor and a fairly long reload. So it's going to miss the cut by a couple of votes there. The AMX M4, a tank that actually fell off the medalist. Now, I personally like the AMX M4. However, I've been slowly moving away from calling a lot of them recently. I'm not sure why. I think they're just a little too slow sometimes. But that frontal hull armor and that 560 Alpha makes face-hugging enemy vehicles and keeping them from moving and pushing them back into walls, as well as trading, very nice with this vehicle. But in keeping with our standards, 52.38% is not 65%. So that vehicle will not make the cut. No votes for the BZ E100, 76.19% with 16 votes. This tank can use a 750 Alpha, which has fairly solid heat rounds, or a 128mm that actually hits for a solid 520 with a buff in the last few years, meaning this is a fairly strong vehicle. It is, however, held back by its very flat cheeks, which are easily pennable by 330 heat a lot of the time, as well as any heavy tanks that are firing premium against it as well, meaning that you have to angle it, and every time you go to fire, oftentimes you're going to take a hit as well. Moving on, the FV215B, probably the worst tier 10 heavy on here. Not going to get any votes. Same with the IS-4, the IS-7, one of my favorite heavy tanks, 95.24%. Everybody voted for it except for one person. Very strong heavy tank, probably the gold standard of fast heavies. If you're not including the Chieftain, at least for tech tree ones, you can get a ton of hit points on here that rival super heavies. You have good armor. You have an okay gun. It hits for 490, fairly inaccurate, but you can get this thing up to a whopping 68.6 kilometers an hour with a close to 20 power to weight, over 20 power to weight if you're using some of those directives. So that is going to be our second heavy to make the list. Where are we? Kranwagen, 1 vote, used to be on the medalist. However, with the nerf to it a couple years ago, it quickly became a irrelevant vehicle in competitive play. Same with the M5Y, a tank that I hyped up and didn't make it. Mouse, probably the best super heavy if you want hit points. 17 votes for 80.95%. A lot of health, 3,300 if you're running the durability device, which everybody should be. And it can hold its own, hits for 490. Pretty decent tank. It is incredibly slow though, which is the one thing that holds it back. With a turbo, you can get it up to 25. And it is used a decent amount. Object 260, one of our first reward vehicles in here. Fast, it's probably a little bit quicker than a 277, hits for 440, better DPM, gun depression isn't too great on it, got a massive lower plate, it doesn't have great frontal armor, turret's pretty good, but this also makes it a medalist with 17 votes. Object 277, the quicker version of the IS-7, less armor, more speed, it uses heat instead of APCR, which makes it better when attacking tanks from the front, but the IS-7 is going to do better from the sides as its APCR rounds are going to be able to go right through the tracks, and you can get better drive wheel shots in than 277. 279E, it had 19 votes. I'm a little surprised it didn't get 21, as this is probably the strongest tier 10 heavy there is, hitting for 440 when it ramps up onto a block or a foundation of a building. It's quite difficult to pen the hull of this vehicle. Turret's fairly impenetrable. You can get lucky cupola shots, but it's not easy, making this our 5th heavy to make the medalist. Moving on quickly, 705A, great side scraper. The gun leaves a lot to be desired, and oftentimes you find yourself missing or bouncing more than actually penning the enemy tank. Object 780, I made a video on this vehicle. It's sort of another tank that falls into the Russian heavy class. It's not that quick. The lower plate isn't that big. However, it sits quite high up on the tank, meaning that you have to hide behind a fairly large rubble pile. It sort of fills a void that isn't there. The hull isn't that great. It's not that fast. It does hit for 530, which is nice. 40 more than a 277, but it's not enough to put it on the meta list as it only gets 9.52%. Panzer 7, the worst version of the VKK coming up. Horrible weak points on the side. Rear turreted tank, not going to work. Rinoceronte, something that was just buffed and we're experimenting with. However, it seems like most people don't want to experiment with it as it has 0 votes. The ST2, the first double-barreled vehicle and the only one at tier 10. 1 vote, decent armor. It's a little slow, and in the fast-paced competitive play, it's just not the best vehicle. S-Conk, probably the best hold-down vehicle other than the Chieftain. 90.48% votes, meaning that this is our first hold-down or gun depression heavy to go on our list. Now, the E5, another gun depression heavy, along with the S-Conk we just talked about and the Kranwagen. However, it's got a giant weak point on the top, meaning that every time you poke over a ridge, you're presenting an easy pen for the enemy. T57 Heavy, great burst damage, meaning it gets 14%, but it doesn't have great armor, and just a lot of callers don't prefer it. Chieftain, 18 votes. I was, again, surprised to see this one not at 21. Probably the best tier 10 in the game, in my opinion. You have got good speed, good armor, good gun depression, great gun, and it can pretty much do anything. It can often outtrade its opponents, especially mediums, with that 440 alpha, and it's going to bounce a ton of shots. It really doesn't have any weaknesses as a tier 10. Type 5 Heavy, pretty much a credit and XP pinata for the enemy team, as well as a win generator. VK7201K, a rear-turreted Clan Wars reward tank that hits for 750. Now, the big downfall of this vehicle is that these shells are extremely slow, only going about 600 meters a second, I believe. It might be 680, close to 700, but they're very slow, meaning that you're not going to be sniping at all with this vehicle if you have to. Now, it does have a similar weak point as the Panzer 7 that we discussed earlier. However, it's about half the size, meaning the enemy tanks are going to really have to aim to hit that. VZ55 are final tank other than the WZ111 which got no votes, but the VZ has a nice 2-round autoloader, both hitting for 490 damage, giving you a potential of 980 alpha. Now, this is great for trading with enemies, as the inner clip reload is 2 seconds. Meaning that you can fire your 980, pull back around the corner, forcing the enemies to maybe drive into a Sturv or heavies that you have behind it. You have multiple of these VZs. You can take out a tier 10 extremely quickly. With a 20-second reload, you're going to reload quickly enough that you should be able to pull back around that corner in no time. 5A, decent gun depression. It's fairly fast. However, a lot of times when you're bringing fast heavies, you're not bringing them for the gun depression. You're bringing them for the speed and the armor, and the 5A doesn't really have that in comparison to the IS-7 and 277, meaning it doesn't get any votes. Quickly moving on to the tank destroyers. For some reason here, I think, because we got less responses, it's actually going to show the percentages other than the T123, which I guess got the top. So moving on quickly, 114 SP2, not the greatest tank. It doesn't really do that much that well. Foch 155. Now, the cousin of the Foch B, this tank hits for 750 or maybe it's 650 per shot. Can't quite remember, with a 5-second inner clip. Now, it has a very long reload, and the reason that this probably didn't make it on is that it can't spread its damage around as much. And actually, it takes longer for it to unload than the Foch B. The Foch B got 3 votes, 15%. This tank isn't used very often. However, it's quite devastating when it gets into a good position, and it's able to set up in an area where they know enemies are crossing, dishing out 6 400 round shots for 2400 damage, able to pretty much take a good chunk out of any team that's pushing in. The Contracarro Minotauro did not make it, which was another surprising one. 1 vote short. This is a fantastic Italian TD that has a semi-traversable turret, 5 rounds of 530 alpha damage each, with a 8-second inner clip, meaning that when it's firing, it has a DPM of over 4,000. A little surprising to not see this one make the list. as it's not actually that slow in comparison to similar TDs that are heavily armored. This tank has a ton of armor, and it has 10 degrees of gun depression. The Hori 3, the newest tank. Now, actually, I got one vote in afterwards, so it should be about 18, 19, or about 20%. However, not close enough. The newest TD, fairly quick, good accuracy, hits for 600 or 700 damage, actually, meaning it hits quite hard just between the version 4 and the E3. But it's still new. Callers are figuring it out, so it may make the meta list in the future. It might not. The FE215B183. This tank has the highest alpha in the game, along with the 4005 Stage 2, which we'll get to, but is hopelessly unreliable. And if it misses, you're out for close to 30 seconds, if not more. And if it does hit and doesn't pen and you do 300 damage, it's just not worth it. The Badger got 20%, 4 votes. Very high DPM, just behind the Sturv. But oftentimes in TDs, we're not looking for DPM, and if we are, we're bringing a Sturv. But if we're not, we want that high alpha so we can trade better with vehicles. Meaning that this tank fell a little bit short in the medalist. 4005 Stage 2, it got 1 vote. That may be because the turret is not in the rear. I'm not quite sure why this got votes. But again, like the 183, hopelessly unreliable. Grill 15, no votes. Probably one of the most accurate tier 10s, along with the Sturv. But no armor to speak of. Rear turreted, so it suffers a little bit in gun depression, I believe. So no votes there. JPE100, the hardest hitting tank, reliably in the game with that 420 heat. However, it's extremely slow. It's a massive vehicle, and while the armor is good, it has a fairly easy to pen lowered plate as it's on an E100 chassis, so it did not make the medalist. 268, one of my personal favorites. However, I didn't vote for it as I don't think it's called enough. This is one of the most accurate tanks in the game, despite it being Russian. I have mine down to .26 accuracy, and it has 395 heat. And it's pretty quick as it's built on a T10, or when it came out, an IS-8 chassis, but only 2 votes. So our first tank to make the medalist is the Object 268 version 4. This is a Spearhead TD running in front of those fast heavies that we spoke about earlier, hitting for 650, great armor, good traverse. It's pretty much a fast heavy without a turret and fantastic armor and a good gun. Version 5, sort of the weird cousin, another tank that I hyped up, which didn't turn out that well. It's a TD built on top of the 277 chassis, or maybe it's the T10 chassis, that hits for, it's basically a heavy, but without the armor, but it has the camo of a TD, and it hits for, 750 alpha. So there's not really a place for it, because a lot of times if we're bringing TDs, you're bringing that E3 or the Sturv for the DPM. This doesn't have the great DPM, and it doesn't have any armor like the E3, so it sort of falls in the middle, and it doesn't really have a place here. Our second, and I should mention that, yep, there we go. Second is the Sturv, which we spoke about, and the E3. We'll go over those together. The Sturv, not as much armor, though from the front it is quite hard to pen if you're looking directly at it. The highest DPM at tier 10, I believe. I don't think the Badger has more. I'm pretty sure the Sturv does. Load alpha, but a very, very quick reload, meaning it can spread its damage out. The E3, very heavily armored, hits for 750. Decent accuracy. Despite its hit point nerf, it is still by far the most played tier 10 heavy tank, or TD tank. Last but not least, we have the E4 and then the WZ. The E4, it's like an E3, but it has less armor and a fully traversable turret. It's not worth it at all. Now, the big difference between the E3 and the E4 is that the E4, its cupola can easily be penned. It's green for almost every single tank, even with standard. The E3, it's not. You need very high pen to go through that E3's cupola. Now, the WZ-113 GFT, there's no place for that thing in competitive play, unfortunately. It's kind of like a upgraded ISU-152, and it's not that quick. There's no real place for it. Last but not least, we have Artillery, a tank that has sort of suffered recently. So, quickly, we're going to move through this as this is a long video. Batchat, 3-round auto reloader, not auto reloader, 3-round autoloader, 10 seconds inner clip, very accurate, low alpha, low pen. It can sort of stun, it doesn't have a great splash radius, and it's just not the best vehicle. Conqueror GC, the most inaccurate vehicle, however it has the highest gun arc. meaning that you can shoot over walls, buildings, and rocks. So camping enemies are going to struggle to hide from this vehicle. GW, sort of a mix between the upcoming 261 and the GC. Fairly high gun arc. It's not that flat, but it doesn't have the best rate of fire. It has okay pen, okay alpha. 261 almost fires a direct line. It has a little bit of an arc, which means you're going to struggle to shoot over obstacles, but it's also going to hit vehicles better. It has better pen and better alpha than the Batshat. And with that direct gun arc, or close to direct, as close as you can for an artillery, means that you will oftentimes struggle to hit the top of vehicles as you're going to hit them in the front. But you make up for that in most of the time making contact with your enemy. T92 sort of combines a lot of the other vehicles here, especially the GW and the gun carriage. This thing has the highest alpha of any of the tier 10 arties, but it has a very slow reload and it's not very accurate. So it's best for shooting into groups, but you oftentimes can't rely on that. So that completes the medalist. It doesn't look like I missed any vehicles. And hopefully this explains why we have vehicles on the list, and as well as my thoughts on them. So quickly to recap, our class's new medalist for this upcoming Clan War, which we usually run twice a year, or this upcoming season, if you will. It's the EBR, the CS63, Leopard 1, Object 140, Object 907, the E100, the IS-7, the Mouse, the Object 260, 277, 279, the Super Conqueror, the Chieftain, the VKK, the VZ55, the Object 268 version 4, Sturv 103B, T110E3, the Conqueror GC, and Object 261. So hopefully this was interesting to you. I'm a little surprised I ended up going over every single vehicle, even the ones that weren't voted for. And if you enjoyed it, let me know, and I'll catch you in the next one. See ya.